I'm going to talk to you a little bit about understanding your developers and whether they're a customer or a partner, and the kind of understanding how that approach will change your approach. So first of all, yeah, I'm Sam Machin. I'm a developer advocate at Nexmo. I'll do the customary quick show of hands. Who's heard of Nexmo? Okay. This is Phil's metric, you see, for raising hands. So recently, kind of early this year, I've sort of moved. I've been in the Devrel team for just over 2 years now, but I've moved to a slightly different role within the team where we're starting to look at partnerships and how we're calling it extend, how we extend our capabilities by partnering with other APIs, which I'm sure I'll probably love to talk to you, some of you about that if you've got kind of complementary technologies and things like that. But also that's kind of got me looking at how that differs the Devrel approach for those kind of companies. And the thing the epiphany I had was there are actually 2 types of API company out there. And the fundamental thing is whether you're treating developers as customers or as partners or something else. So the first thing I want to kind of say here is, everybody's different. One thing from this talk is there is no right or wrong answer. I'm not going to tell you, hey, you should be treating your developers as partners or you should be treating them as customers. This is kind of because the answer is different depending on your scenario. So I really want you to kind of think about your own company, how they, what's your approach. I'm going to try and give you some pointers to kind of identify maybe where you fit within that space. So quick show of hands. How many people's company offers an API? I'm assuming just about everybody of some sort. If you're kind of, if you're selling shoes, you're probably not here. Okay, so we all have an API to some extent, whether that's like a hardware device API or SDKs, right through to kind of cloud services. So the next question is your API the product? So this is the important thing. We should be treating our APIs as a product. It's a product we offer, but is that the primary product of your company? Are you an API company, or is the API a secondary product? Is it what if somebody knows your company for? So 2 ways to kind of look at this. Or is it, firstly, do you charge for the API? Is the use of the API how you make money? So at Nexmo, we charge you to access our API. Or the other thing is then, who are the users of your product? Do you have end users and developers, or are your developers your user accounts on your system? So that kind of makes sense. Yeah. How many people would say that the API is the product in your company? Quick. Okay, less than I thought. It's what's interesting as well is there's actually quite a lot of dev tooling companies in here, which is maybe developers are still the customer in that sense. So I kind of started trying to map this out. This little sort of quadranty graph thing, in a very unscientific, me dragging stuff or icons around the screen. I started to try and look at where different companies sit. So we've got two on the side. I call them users. And there's a term that we started to use a little bit, or I started to use within our extend thing of builders. We say the word developers constantly. It's almost like being a Steve Ballmer convention, this, hasn't it? Because how many times has somebody said the word developer today? But actually, developer implies a very, we always think, oh, that's somebody that writes code. And actually, in this space, there's a lot of things where people are creating with our products. Especially these kind of if this, then that, Zapier type products. Now, I would say if you're building a script or a recipe in Zapier, or if this then that, you are building. You're not just using the product. You're building something for somebody else. Even Google Docs, the forms you build in Google Docs, you're creating something there. So your offering is a componentized system, but you wouldn't think of somebody that's doing that as a developer. So yeah, along the side we have users and builders. And then the bottom, product and platform. Really it's just are you more of a component somebody uses in your system, or are you something you use as a shrink wrapped thing or a building block? So if we look at this, we've got up in the top left, we've got the very much user-centric products. In the middle there, Apple. Everybody's heard of them, I hope. They're quite big. So there was specifically the iOS App Store ecosystem. I think WWDC the day before, in the keynote, they announced they've just paid out $100 billion to developers. So, their business model is not to charge developers in that sense because the cash is flowing very much the other way. So that's the extreme. Really, Apple is a consumer products company, but they have a huge developer ecosystem which is powering that, making that product. And then down on the bottom right, we have the classic developer as a customer. So, Nexmo, Pusher, Stripe, where developers are using the API, the product, they're embedding it in their stuff. A couple of interesting ones. Google Maps, that's quite interesting because most people think of Google Maps as a user product. But actually, how many websites do you go to where you see the little Google map embedded on every little random local bar or small business? It might just be a snippet of HTML they've embedded, but that's a kind of more of an API developer builder offering that they're putting out there. So they start to kind of move down a bit. Amazon's kind of interesting. So Amazon have very much like two fronts. We have Alexa at the top, the blue circle. I can say that without something beeping on the stage behind me for once. And then we have AWS. And Amazon almost divides their Devrel activities into two sides of the business. So AWS they charge developers. You're selling a product to developers. You pay for EC2 or S3 or storage, those kind of things on a per usage basis. But then on the Alexa and the Fire TV and that kind of side, Alexa is a consumer product, but they have a huge DevRel activity to encourage developers to build with the APIs to enhance the product. And again, Amazon are actually paying out money to developers now. If you build a successful Alexa skill, you're getting a check from Amazon for like $1,000 in a month or something, because developers are becoming a supplier to them. Slack, I think, is another one. We've had a couple of people talk about Slack and things today. Slack is a really clear-cut one here, where Slack sells a product to companies. They want companies to use Slack, so they'll go and Nexmo pays for Slack, and we use that as our internal tool. But the Slack developer efforts is developers are building features, bots, whatever, little plugins to enhance Slack that makes the Slack product more valuable when they go out and sell that to their customers. So the developer team at Slack, the DevRel team, are not really thinking of developers as customers. Now, it may be that obviously there's overlap and things there that a lot of people that are building on your platform are also using your platform, but that kind of thing shifts a bit. Okay. So next question to ask yourself, why do you offer an API? This may seem a little bit odd, but you said you have some sort of API. If you're not an API-first company, or the API isn't the product, why are you offering it? So obviously, if it's your product, for Nexmo, that's simple. Why do we offer an API? It's how we make money. We wouldn't do very well if we didn't have an API. But then think about the other ones. The first one, it's to increase the value of your product. So this is Apple, Slack, those kind of people. It makes the product we sell more valuable to customers because of what developers build on the API. They are enhancing our product. How many people would buy an iPhone if you couldn't get any apps on it? Windows Phone. The general, why did Windows Phone kind of not really take off? The general consensus is because it didn't have the support of the apps. So it doesn't matter how good for something your product is, often your product needs the developers to make your product a success. Then there's to broaden the reach of your product. So this is the concept like the Google Maps thing. Why does Google want you to embed Google Maps in your website? Because people recognize the Google Maps style and look, and it's, oh yeah, that's Google Maps. I can easily read in the UK, we have the Ordnance Survey maps. It's like a standardized thing that the government produce of maps for going out, hiking and stuff. And it used to be that people could read OS maps. I think we even taught it at school to understand the different colors and shades and stuff. These days, most people probably couldn't, but everybody knows on a Google map, oh yeah, that's what is it, a little beige box, that's a building. It has that kind of visual recognition. And it's worse when you go to a page somewhere and they load you up like a Bing map or something, and then you're like, huh, what? I don't remember this, because Google have made Google Maps the ubiquitous standard. So they're getting people to embed it, which means that when I want to search for directions, I go to maps.google.com. Alexa do this again with the Alexa voice service. So the other half of their API, they provide an API so that you can embed Alexa in your own devices. So people like BMW are building that into cars and that kind of thing. And developers are building it into toasters and weird devices. But again, it's making the product more ubiquitous. It's broadening the reach of the product because it means it's everywhere, and they win that way. And also, to offer the niche features, the customization of our product. So it's accepting that if you're building a consumer product, or a user product, I should say, particularly actually in enterprises, you're not going to be able to offer every feature every user wants to all of your users. Because one, you're going to end up with a really, really cumbersome product with 400 different option menus and settings and everything. And also, it's just some stuff is going to be too small for you to bother with, or you don't understand that marketplace. We're not experts in that vertical. So by offering an API, people that use your product that do understand that specific space, they can tweak or build the extensions to your product that mean that it fits it. And enterprises just always want to change something. You sell software to an enterprise, they're always going to be like, oh, yeah, it's great, but we want to change that because, we can. And we're going to buy 1,000 seats from you if you make that menu blue or something. Okay, on the flip side, why do developers use your API? Why should they? What's their motivations? I think the simplest or the earliest stage, if you like, just starting up by opening up an API, it's to solve their own problems. It's the hobbyists, scratching your own itch scenario. Developers like to be able to tweak or customize a product. I think again, why do developers like Slack? Because they can build their own little plugins. I have a hookup to my doorbell into my personal Slack group organization, which is just me. So when someone rings my doorbell, I get a pop-up message in Slack. And I'm never going to productize this, I'm never going to sell it, but it's really useful. And like all my smart home automation events get posted into a Slack channel and things because I want to tinker with that. But that base stage of developers doing stuff, they're gonna play with the product. They want to extend it. Then there's they want to enhance their own products. This is kind of interesting. This is the great example here, I think, is Expensify and Uber. So most people probably have used Expensify for your expense tracking. You can link your Expensify account to your Uber account. So when I take a trip on Uber and I've used my business account, it automatically loads it into Expensify. I don't even know who built that, whether that was Expensify used the Uber integration or Uber used the Expensify API. It doesn't really matter, but that's brilliant because the two products have both been enhanced. It's win-win. I'm more likely to use Uber because it automatically imports to Expensify rather than using some random taxi where I've got to get a little bit of paper and take a photo and things. And I'm more likely to use Expensify because it just makes it easy to import stuff into Uber. So those kind of that's the win-win scenario for offering an API, looking at partners. Reselling your product, I think in particularly like fintech and that kind of space, that's quite common to people will. They'll just want to refer you. You'll offer they'll sign up a customer, and you'll pay them out a referral. White labeling your product, that kind of thing. And then the final one is, they're building a business. You're going to become a channel. This is that marketplace space where developers are going to build something on your product. They're going to offer an app or an extension of your service, and you're going to sell that for them. Okay, things to think about, things to watch out for, the danger zone, pitfalls. And I think what's important is, it's important to think about this stuff up front before it happens, rather than waiting until one of these kind of moments occurs and then you have to kind of be in a reactive PR, face-saving mode because something's blown up on Hacker News or Twitter or Reddit or whatever. What happens when a partner uses your API to build a product that competes with your product? If you're a product company, this, and you can pretty much guarantee this will happen at some point. And you as Devrel are going to be the ones kind of talking perhaps to the partner, to the developer, and you've got product guys who's interested in the revenue targets for the product, and they're not maybe looking at the company as a whole, who are going to say, well, you've got to kill their access, pull their API key, disconnect them, kill their product off. And that's going to be awkward. You're not going to come out well. So have that conversation with your product team up front. What about misuse, brand damage? What happens when somebody creates something? I'm sure we can all think of ideas using the darker sides of our minds as to something like you could create with an API that isn't great PR for you as a company to be associated with, but is now doing really well on beta or Reddit or whatever. How are you going to manage that, handle that? Are you going to have upfront approvals? Are you going to have like an invite only, something like an approvals process in the App Store like Apple have? Are you going to just let it become the Wild West. And then, can partners use your API to short your revenue model? What is the revenue model of your product? That's quite important to know up front. And then when you're offering an API, you're not putting that revenue model at risk. I think we all kind of know the problems that Twitter had in the early days when they were talking about developers and APIs, because they suddenly realized that they were kind of losing control of the users because people were third-party apps and people were never interacting with Twitter, so they wanted to try and introduce a revenue model and like ads. I mean, ads are a really good one here, where if your revenue model for your product is ad-driven and you're offering access to the content of the product via the API without serving the ads, that's risky. People are going to find a way people are going to build other ways to consume your product. And finally, how will you manage competition? If you get to that marketplace, that ecosystem thing, we'd all love to be Apple and have the $100 billion of payouts to developers. But Apple have to manage that ecosystem, that marketplace. Competition, we agree, is a great thing. We need competition, but you have to police it. What happens when you get people leaving fake reviews for products or developers complaining to you that, hey, this developer's copied my product, and you suddenly become this arbiter of the ecosystem. And that can become a huge kind of community drain. If that falls to the Devrel team, now hopefully by the time you get to the stage of the App Store or something, you've built up that team. But if you're building out an ecosystem, a marketplace where your developers are going to compete with each other, then you have to, are you going to ensure fair competition? Are you going to have preferred status? Are you going to cross-promote developers? Your sales guy's going to go out and sell things. Cool. So, speed up a little, 2 slides. Last one is, so then looking at some of the activities you're going to do, how do the activities you're going to do differ whether you're talking about customers or partners? So on the left, we have the stuff you're going to do that I think probably doesn't really change massively whether you're charging developers or not. So I would say this is the classic Devrel stuff we all do. We're building, we all want to create great documentation and libraries. Developers want that whether they're paying for it or not. We're going to build demos. Maybe your demos, you need to think a little bit about, well, if what are we trying to encourage people to do? Are we trying to give them something, give away a product? They're going to just copy a demo and launch that in our app store? Or are we trying to show them, or are we trying to help them solve a solution? But generally you're going to still create demos in the same way. You're going to write blog posts, collect feedback, give talks, all that kind of stuff the same. And then the stuff that changes a bit. We talked a little about the community. I think community is very different depending on whether you're charging your developers or not. If they're customers or they're a partner, that really is going to change. And then the other stuff is really the rest of the organization, the rest of the company. How do you interact with them? Your relationship with product, with support. If your support team, you have a support team and your developers are customers, they're probably talking to developers. If you have customers who are users, your support team are probably geared up to support them as users, and you may be providing the developer support. The marketing tone of voice you use. Again, that's going to change where if your marketing team are selling to enterprises, but you want to talk to developers, you may have to have a very different tone of voice. The same thing for brands, and of course sales. Let's all talk about sales for a minute. The sales guys, are they selling to developers? Are you providing them, or are you giving the sales guys something that makes the product more valuable to talk to people? So, final slide. Wrap up. The takeaways, really. Things I want you to understand. Know your own position. Understand where your company is. Take some time to think about, well, are we actually, are they customers? Are they partners? What are their motivations? Looking for those mutual benefit, those win-win scenarios where somebody can build something that means that both your products are better. And I think the final one, value the developers, the trust developers put in you. If they've chosen to build on your platform, and if they've chosen to build a business on your platform, they've got a lot more at risk potentially than you can. So, don't pull the rug out from under them, because that might be how this guy's paying his mortgage or something. Cool. Thank you very much.